My mom swapped the DNA test because she wanted me to be a bastard, but I'm her only son. I always knew my mother didn't love me the way mothers usually love their sons. But I never imagined she would try to erase me from our bloodline completely. It started subtle, as these things often do. The way she'd sigh when I walked into a room, like I was an inconvenience just by existing. The way her voice always rose with fake cheer when my brother, Daniel, was around, her golden boy, her miracle, the son she said she actually prayed for. I was the older one. The accident. The mistake. You're not like Daniel, she'd whisper when she thought I couldn't hear. Daniel's going somewhere. Daniel's worth it. That was her favorite phrase. Worth it. I was 17 the first time she said it to my face. I had come home late from my part-time job at a gas station, hands blackened with oil, uniform soaked in sweat. She sat at the kitchen table, her arms crossed tight, her mouth pursed like she was holding back something rotten. You smell like a mechanic, she spat. Don't you want better for yourself? Or are you content being nothing? I'm working, I said quietly. I'm helping with bills. She laughed. Not the kind you hear in sitcoms. No, this one had edges. You think $10 an hour makes you a man? No, I didn't. But it helped cover groceries when Dad left. And I never saw Daniel lifting a damn finger. By the time I was 22, I had left home. I started a small business with nothing but second-hand tools and an old laptop. Mobile repairs. Then automation installations. By 26, I had 4 vans running, contracts with the city, and my name registered on state records. I sent my mother a postcard when I opened my 3rd location. She never replied. Years passed. I got used to her silence. I got used to the ache. Then, 2 summers ago, Daniel's wife gave birth to a baby girl. My niece. I drove 5 hours to see her. Held her in my arms. I didn't even know babies could smell like hope. I saw Mom there, cooing over the baby, holding Daniel's hand like she was the proud matriarch of some royal line. I said hello. She looked me in the eyes and said, "Oh, you're here." That's when I realized she had never forgiven me for being born. The bomb dropped a few months later. Out of nowhere, she called me, her number still saved, buried in my contacts like a scar. I need to talk, she said. Her voice was weirdly composed, like she'd been practicing. She invited me to lunch. Neutral ground. When I showed up, she handed me an envelope. No eye contact. I had a test done, she said. DNA. Yours. From an old toothbrush. I stared at her, my stomach turning cold. What? I had to be sure, she continued, her voice laced with something like glee. I always suspected you weren't really Richard's. Maybe not even mine. The room spun. She smiled like she'd won a game. And I was right. You're not my son. I didn't believe her. I couldn't. But the test had a lab logo. A result. 0% probability of maternity. You can stop pretending now, she said, leaning back in her chair. Go find your real family. I didn't speak. I walked out of that cafe and didn't look back. For 3 days, I couldn't eat. Couldn't think. But on the 4th day, something snapped. I contacted an independent lab. Sent in my own DNA. And this time, I brought Daniel in too. When the results came, I read them 3 times. 99.9999% probability. Mother, Susan Evelyn Hart. Father, Richard Allen Hart. I stared at the paper like it had teeth. She was my mother. She'd lied. Or worse, she had tampered with the test. And suddenly, I saw it all clearly. She wanted to believe I wasn't hers. She needed to believe that, to justify the hatred she had fed for decades. She didn't want a failure. She wanted a reason to cut me out. She didn't get it. What she did get, though, was a letter from my lawyer. Because it turns out, when our father died, he left a trust. For both sons. Equally. Except Mom never told me. She forged documents. Transferred the assets to Daniel. Hid the paperwork in a locked drawer, thinking I'd never find out. But I found everything. And this time, I had more than just resentment. I had proof. She's now under investigation for inheritance fraud. Daniel's wife left him when the story broke, said she didn't want their daughter growing up in a family built on lies. And me? I bought a lake house. The trust money helped, sure, but it was mostly from selling the company I built from scratch. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. But I still kept that DNA result. Because every time I start to doubt myself, I look at that paper and remember. She tried to write me out of her blood, but I was always her son. That's what she said the last time we spoke. It was 2 weeks after the DNA results confirmed what I had always suspected but never dared say aloud, that the woman who raised me despised me not because of who I was, but because I reminded her of a man she could never fully control. I didn't go to her house with anger. I went for answers. She opened the door like she'd been waiting. Her hair was pulled back tight, lipstick too red, the way she always looked when she was trying to intimidate someone. I stepped inside without a word, dropped the manila folder on the kitchen table, and watched her eyes flicker when she saw the lab name. "You had it tested again," she said, almost bored. "I had to," I replied, "because the first one was fake." She didn't deny it, not even a twitch. "You know what's funny?" she said, crossing her arms. "I thought you'd come here screaming. Maybe throw something. You always were the dramatic one." "No," I said. "That was you." There was a long silence. Then she sat, calm, deliberate. "You want the truth," she said, her voice low. "Fine. I never wanted 2 kids. Daniel was planned. You weren't. And your father, your real father, not just the man on paper, he never wanted a family at all." I felt something ice-cold crawl up my spine. "You said Richard was He was," she snapped. "Biologically, legally, everything. But emotionally? He was long gone by the time you were 5. He saw too much of himself in you, the stubbornness, the sharp tongue, the quiet. And I hated it." I sank into the chair across from her. "So you decided to hate me too?" "I didn't decide," she said coldly. "It just happened. You were a constant reminder of everything I couldn't fix. Every failure. Every mischance. You made me feel trapped." I stared at her. This woman, my mother, had orchestrated an emotional exile so perfectly, I'd spent years believing I earned her cruelty. "But Daniel?" I asked. "He's perfect." "Huh?" She smirked. "Daniel needed me. You didn't." That line hit harder than anything else. I didn't need her, so she punished me for it. "You faked a DNA test," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you realize what kind of person does that?" "I needed to know," she said quietly. "I needed a reason. Something to explain why I couldn't love you." And there it was, her final confession, gift-wrapped in cold logic. I stood up. "You don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm done." She didn't follow me to the door. Just sat there, staring at the folder like it might change its contents if she looked hard enough. Outside, the sun was starting to set. I walked to my car, shut the door, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for 20 years. That night, I burned the first fake DNA test. I watched the flames chew through the paper, curl the edges, erase the lies she clung to for so long. But I kept the second one, because it wasn't for her anymore. It was for me. Daniel showed up at my door just after 10 p.m., red-eyed, angry, and confused. He didn't knock like a brother. He pounded like a cop. I opened the door slowly, half expecting a punch. But he just stood there, holding a sheaf of papers in his fist. "I got this from Brooke's dad," he said. "He hired someone. A lawyer." I didn't say anything, just stepped aside and let him in. Daniel had always been the clean one. White sneakers, trimmed beard, gym fit. But now he looked frayed at the edges, sleeves wrinkled, jaw clenched, like the carefully assembled version of him was starting to collapse. He dropped the papers on my table. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. "I tried," I replied. "You were too busy playing golden child." His eyes flashed. "Don't do that. Don't act like I knew. I didn't sign anything." "No," I said. "But you cashed it. Lived off it. You never questioned why you had access to an inheritance I never saw a dime of." I thought. He stopped, shook his head. "Mom said it was a gift. That dad amended things because you didn't want the money." I laughed, bitter and short. "She told you I rejected a 6-figure trust? And you believe that?" His face fell. A slow, sick realization creeping in. "I didn't ask questions," he said quietly, "because I didn't want to know the answers." I slid the copy of the notarized amendment across the table. His eyes scanned it. When he reached the signature line, his shoulders dropped. "She forged it." "Yep," I said. "Backdated. Filed through a paralegal friend. Clean enough to hold for a while. But not forever." "Why?" he asked, looking at me like a stranger. "Why would she do that?" "Because she wanted to be right," I said. "About me. About you. About everything. And if I had the money, if I had the name, then she'd have no excuse left to hate me." Daniel sank into the chair, the bravado gone. "She said you were lying," he whispered. "Even today. She said you hacked something, made it up. But this," he held the paper like it burned. "This is her handwriting." I watched him crumble. And I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. "What do I do now?" he asked. I shrugged. "Tell the truth. To the lawyers. To Brooke. To yourself." Daniel looked at me with wide, broken eyes. "She destroyed us." No, I said. We let her. He didn't argue. That night, he stayed on my couch. Didn't talk much after that. In the morning, he left without saying goodbye. But I got a text later. Just 4 words. I believe you now. It wasn't enough to fix things. But maybe it was the beginning. It came from the probate lawyer, a man I'd never met, but who'd handled my father's affairs after his death. His name was Mr. Donahue, and his voice on the phone was grave and deliberate. I've been reviewing the documents your brother submitted, he said, and something's off. Your father's file was supposed to include a final personal letter. Instructions he left behind. I remember drafting it with him. He was insistent. What kind of letter? I asked. A private one, Donahue replied. Not legal. Emotional. He called it his truth insurance. Said you'd understand when the time came. I didn't understand. Not then. But when I met Donahue in person, he handed me a scanned image of a memo from 2014. My father's handwriting. His signature. A short note that was supposed to be filed in the estate's personal effects. Except it never made it. Because, as Donahue explained, your mother told us he'd changed his mind. Said he destroyed it himself. But we never saw a sign withdrawal. I think she burned it. My hands were shaking as I read the copy Donahue had saved on his old hard drive, just in case. Asterisk to my sons. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And if Susan hasn't let this letter through, then there are things I never got to say out loud. First, to Eli. I was too hard on you. Too distant. You were so much like me it scared me. But you never needed handouts. You had fire. Strength. I saw it, even when I pretended I didn't. I didn't leave you less because I loved you less. I left everything equal because that's what you both deserved. Don't let anyone rewrite that. Not even your mother. And if she tries, go looking. You'll find the truth. Asterisk. Love. Dad. I sat there in stunned silence. Donahue cleared his throat. He left it with specific instructions. Told me to tell you if anything ever seen. Tampered. I never expected it would come to this. But it had. And suddenly, everything snapped into place. The cold shoulder. The forged amendments. The fake DNA test. She wasn't just trying to humiliate me, she was trying to erase me. She didn't want me to be my father's son. Not legally. Not emotionally. Not financially. And now? Now I had his words in black and white. Words she tried to incinerate. That night, I called Daniel. Told him everything. He came over in under 15 minutes, still in work clothes, jaw clenched like he'd been holding his breath for hours. When I showed him the letter, he read it in silence. Then he said, she lied to both of us. I nodded. She didn't want us to know he saw through her. Daniel looked at me, then at the door. We need to confront her. No, I said, sliding the letter back into the folder. Not yet. Why not? Because the lawyers are filing. And the more she talks now, the deeper she digs her grave. He looked at me, surprised. And for the first time in our lives, he didn't try to argue. The woman at the door was small, neatly dressed, and trembling. She had a cane in one hand and a folder clutched tight in the other. Her name was Joyce, and she had been our family's housekeeper for over 2 decades. I hadn't seen her since I was 19. I shouldn't be here, she said the moment I opened the door. But I saw your name in the papers. About the trust. The investigation. And I can't stay quiet anymore. I let her in, offered her a seat, some tea, anything to steady her nerves. She declined it all. I'm not doing this for money, she said. Or revenge. I'm doing it because your father was a good man. And he didn't deserve what happened. She handed me the folder. Inside were copies of old emails, dated memos, notes she'd made, all tied to the months leading up to my father's death and the weeks after. She made me shred something, Joyce whispered. Said it was outdated, but it had his signature on it. And your name. I blinked. The amendment? No. It was the real one. The one that split the trust equally between you and Daniel. I saw it. And then one morning, she told me to burn the trash early, before the shred been filled. I knew something was wrong. Joyce paused, tears in her eyes. She paid me extra that day. Told me not to say a word. Said you weren't really his. That if I cared about the family, I'd keep my mouth shut. I sat there, floored. You kept records? I asked. I did, she nodded. Not everything, but enough. The documents she gave me, dates, emails, even receipts for notarized letters, formed a damning trail. Combined with the fake DNA test, the forgery, and the missing letter from my father, it painted a clear picture. My mother hadn't just manipulated us. She'd orchestrated a full-blown deception, trying to rewrite our father's legacy out of spite. Joyce stood up, gripping her cane. I'm testifying, she said. For him. For you. You were always kind to me, Eli. Always decent. She never could stand that. I walked her to the door. She paused before stepping out. One more thing, she said. Your dad used to keep a journal. Every night, in that study you weren't allowed in. My heart froze. Do you know where it is? I asked. She shook her head. But if it still exists, it's the final nail in her coffin. The study. That room was sacred. Growing up, I wasn't allowed in there. Ever. Not even to vacuum. It had a solid oak door with an antique brass knob, always locked. Mom used to say, that's your father's place. Don't disturb it. When I moved out, the room disappeared from my mind like everything else in that house. But after Joyce's visit, after her mention of the journal, it came back to me like a gut punch. So I went back. The old house stood just like I remembered, the fading red shutters, the cracked driveway, the same smell of dust and air freshener that had no business being in the same room. Mom wasn't home. Daniel had warned me she was spending a few days at a wellness center, lawyer's orders, probably. I still had a key. The study was on the second floor, third door on the left. I stood in front of it for a long minute before trying the handle. Locked, but not deadbolt. I went to the garage, grabbed a flathead, and popped the latch open like I used to do with my bedroom window when I snuck out as a teen. The click of the mechanism felt louder than thunder. The door opened with a groan, and suddenly I was in. It was like stepping into a mausoleum. Everything was untouched. The desk was still stacked with unopened mail. A decanter of whiskey sat half full beside a dusty glass. A cracked leather chair faced the window, sun-bleached and sagging. And there it was. On the desk, beside an old metal lamp, lay a thick leather-bound journal. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I picked it up slowly, hands trembling. The first page, R.H. Hart, personal. Private. To be read only when I'm gone. And beneath it, his handwriting. This is not a diary. It's a record of what I've seen, what I regret, and the truth I couldn't say aloud while living in this house. I sat in his chair and started reading. He wrote about me, about her. Susan never forgave me for Eli, not because of how he came into the world, but because he reminded her of everything she couldn't control. His independence, his silence, his refusal to grovel. She hated that he didn't need her love to function. I failed him. God help me. I saw what she did, the little cuts, the emotional walls, and I let it slide because I was tired. Because I thought I could make it up to him in the will. But you can't fix a childhood with paperwork. There were entries about the night I moved out. How he sat in that study with a glass in his hand, listening to the silence in the hallway. How he wished he'd said something more than, take care of yourself. And then I found it. The page that made my breath stop. I caught Susan making calls. To a lab. Looking for retesting. She wanted to challenge Eli's paternity quietly. Said she had doubts. I told her if she touched a hair on that boy's legacy, I'd rewrite the will myself, give him everything, and expose her to the boys. That was the last real fight we had. The next day, she booked a cruise with Daniel. Said she needed a break from the house. He knew. He knew what she was doing. He tried to stop it. But then he died, and she did it anyway. I sat there, that journal in my lap, the sun setting outside like the world was closing a curtain. And that's when I decided, she's going to face this. Every lie, every theft, every twist of the knife. I stood up, took the journal, and walked out of the house without looking back. Because this time, I held the truth. And she couldn't burn it. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is listening. My mother sat across from me at the defendant's table, wrapped in pearls and bitterness. Her lawyer looked composed, but tense. Mine? Cool as ice, flipping through the binder we'd compiled over the last 3 months. Emails, bank statements, the journal, and Joyce, sitting in the second row behind me, ready to testify. The judge adjusted her glasses, then looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Hart, she said, this hearing is not just about financial mismanagement. It is about intent, motivation, fraud. Do you understand that? My mother gave a tight nod, lips pursed, chin up like she was at a tea party. The first blow came fast. My lawyer handed over Exhibit A, the lab report. The fake DNA result. Dated, watermarked, and cross-checked with a forensic analyst we'd hired. The document had been altered. Signature traced. ID number mismatched from the original lab database. Do you recognize this document, ma'am? He asked. She glanced at it. No, I don't recall that. You submitted it to the estate attorney on March 17th of last year. That's not possible. He cut in. Ma'am, we have IP logs. It was uploaded from your home desktop. The courtroom murmured. The judge raised a hand. Silence. Then came Exhibit B, the journal. Her eyes narrowed when she saw it. You're going to use that? Something scribbled in the dark by a dying man. I stood. Something you tried to destroy. The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Hart, you'll have your turn. My lawyer nodded, calm. We're not relying on memory, Your Honor. We've had the handwriting authenticated. And Mr. Hart's notes specifically reference conversations and threats made by the defendant. Next up was Joyce. She walked slowly to the stand, cane clicking with each step. She swore in, cleared her throat, and looked directly at my mother. I was there when she told me to burn the envelope. I knew it wasn't trash, but I was afraid of her. The court fell quiet. She said Eli wasn't hers. Said she had to clean the mess up before it spread. I didn't know what she meant then, but I do now. My mother turned red, not from shame, from rage. You ungrateful little. Enough, the judge snapped. One more outburst, and you'll be held in contempt. By the time the morning ended, we had laid everything bare. Not just the forged DNA test, not just the siphoned funds, but the real reason behind it all. She didn't want to admit that I was her son, because if I was, then she had to face everything she had done to me. The judge recessed for lunch. As I stepped out into the hallway, Daniel caught up to me. He looked pale, drawn. She's going to lose, isn't she? He asked. She already has, I said. She just doesn't know it yet. He nodded slowly. I should have stood up to her years ago. I didn't respond. We both knew it wouldn't have mattered. When court resumed, the judge looked directly at my mother and said the words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. Based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud, manipulation, and falsified documentation, I am ruling in favor of Mr. Eli Hart. The trust will be reinstated to its original terms. Criminal charges may follow. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. My mother didn't look at me as she stood, didn't speak, just turned and walked out of the courtroom like a ghost retreating into daylight. But for once, she couldn't control the ending. It was 2 weeks after the verdict when Daniel asked to meet for coffee. We sat in silence for the first few minutes, the kind of silence where both of you know the weight of everything that's happened, but neither knows where to start. He looked older, not in the gray hair kind of way, but like he'd been carrying something heavy for too long, and only now realized it was never his to carry. She moved out, he said finally, eyes on his untouched drink. Said she needed space. But I think she just didn't want to look at us. Us. That word hit me in the chest. Did she ever say anything? I asked. He shook his head. Not about the trial. Not about Dad's letter. Not even about Joyce. Just kept saying the world turned on her. That she did what she had to do. I didn't reply. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on the table. I spent most of my life thinking she was protecting us. That when she shut you out, it was because you were distant. Difficult. But now I realize maybe she was just protecting herself. That rang too true. I was never hard to love, I said softly. She just made it hard for herself to try. Daniel looked like he wanted to say something rehearsed, maybe even meaningful, but all he managed was, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something. I don't hate you, I said. But I don't think I can ever be what we were supposed to be. He nodded. I know. I think that's fair. We parted with a handshake. Not a hug. Not yet. That night, I drove past the house one last time. The windows were dark. The porch light was out. The place looked smaller than I remembered, like all the years had drained its shape, left it hollow. I didn't get out of the car. I just sat there and thought about how much of my life I'd spent trying to be good enough for someone who never wanted me to be whole. I thought about Dad, the journal, the letter, the quiet moments of strength he never knew how to express. And for the first time, I forgave him too. Because maybe we were both survivors in our own way. The next morning, I booked a flight to Lisbon. No reason. Just space. Space from the trial. From her. From the versions of myself I no longer wanted to carry. And as the plane took off, I looked out the window, that old ache in my chest finally lifting. She tried to make me feel like I didn't belong in her world. So I built my own. It was cloudy the day I went to the cemetery. No dramatic thunder, no symbolic rain. Just quiet. My father's grave sat beneath an old oak tree, a little crooked from time and roots. The stone was simple. Richard Allen Hart, 1958 to 2018. Loved. Misunderstood. Always watching. The last line was Daniel's idea, I think. At the time, I thought it was corny. Now, it feels like prophecy. I sat beside the stone for a while before I opened the journal. It had been months since I read it, since the trial, since my mother left town, since the dust settled. I flipped to a page near the middle, one I had bookmarked but never truly absorbed before. Asterisk Eli doesn't smile much anymore. Not around the house. I think he knows. Not what, but something. I want to tell him I love him. But every time I open my mouth, it sounds like discipline. Or disappointment. I hate that. He doesn't need my approval. He just needs my presence. I hope he knows I tried. I hope one day, when he's older, he'll read this and understand. I never stopped being proud of him. I just didn't know how to say it without sounding weak. Asterisk. I closed the book and just breathed for a while. It's strange how grief can find you years after the person is gone. How love sometimes takes the long way home. I forgive you, I whispered, for not knowing how to say it, for not stopping her, for leaving too soon. And then I placed the journal at the base of the headstone. Not because I didn't want it anymore, but because he deserved to keep it. I stood up, brushed the dirt from my jeans, and smiled. Thank you, I said aloud. For what? For being my father. For fighting in his quiet way. For leaving behind just enough truth for me to find myself. I walked back to the car, hands in my pockets, heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind me, under the oak tree, the wind rustled through the pages of the journal, and for a brief second, I could swear I heard his voice. Proud of you, son. 3 years later, I stood in a nursery I helped build with my own hands. Soft blue walls. A bookshelf already half full. A rocking chair near the window, the exact same kind my father once sat in, though I didn't remember that until I saw the photo in Daniel's attic last Christmas. A rare photo. One where my father held me, barely a toddler, both of us caught mid-laugh. I'd never seen that smile on his face before. My wife walked in, 8 months pregnant, holding a box of hand-me-down baby clothes from a friend. Still thinking? She asked. Just remembering. She sat down beside me. We didn't speak for a while. The house was quiet, but the kind of quiet that wraps around you instead of swallowing you. You think you'll be like him? She asked gently. I thought about the question. Not with fear, but with understanding. I hope I'll be better, I said. But I'll carry what he gave me. She smiled. Then this kid's got nothing to worry about. After she went to bed, I stayed up, picked up a pen, pulled out a notebook, and started writing a letter. Not for lawyers, not for courtrooms, just for one child, mine. Dear little one. If you're reading this someday, I want you to know 2 things. First, I loved you before I ever met you. Second, I've walked through fire to make sure you'll never wonder whether you belong. You come from people who've made mistakes. Big ones. But you also come from someone who survived them. Who learned. Who chose to be more. I won't always be perfect. But I promise you this. You will always, always be wanted. Love. Dad. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of the baby's first storybook, the one we'll read together 100 times. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do with the past is make sure it never touches the future. And that's how the story ends. Not in a courtroom. Not with revenge. But with a room full of peace. And a father who finally knew exactly who he was.